Moscow, Idaho is the kind of place where nothing bad is supposed to happen. A small, tight-knit college town. Tree-lined streets. Football games on Saturdays. Students walking home at midnight without thinking twice. That all changed on the morning of November 13, 2022. For students went to sleep after a normal night out. By the time the sun came up, they were gone, stabbed to death inside their own home while two of their roommates slept just floors below, never hearing a single sound. The killer had been watching the house for months. And the detail that made this case unlike almost any other? He was a criminology PhD student, someone who had dedicated his academic life to studying exactly how and why people commit crimes. His name is Bryan Kohberger. And this is the full story. Before we get to the killer, you need to know who was lost that night. Kaylee Goncalves, 21 years old. A senior from Rathdrum, Idaho, bright, driven, and close with her family. She was one of the most popular students in her friend group. Madison Mogen, also 21. Kaylee's best friend. The two had grown up together, gone to college together, and shared a room in the house on King Road. They were inseparable right up until the end. Xana Kernodle, 20 years old. A junior majoring in marketing. That night, her boyfriend had come over to stay. Chapin, 20 years old. A freshman from Conway, Washington. He was at the house visiting Xana. The two had been dating for less than a year. The day before the murders, according to one of the surviving roommates, the group had a completely ordinary Saturday. Taco Bell in the morning. Naps in the afternoon. Parties at night. Normal college life. None of them had any idea what was coming. The house at 1122 King Road was home to 6 students. 4 would not survive the night. In the early morning hours of November 13th, sometime between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m., Bryan Kohberger entered the house. He moved through the building methodically. He killed Ethan and Xana on the 3rd floor. Then Kaylee and Maddie on the 2nd floor. Each victim was stabbed multiple times. The violence was overwhelming. And then, he left. Quietly. Without triggering a single alarm. 2 roommates were home the entire time, asleep on the ground floor. One of them, Dylan Mortensen, later told investigators she had woken up briefly and stepped into the hallway. She saw a figure in dark clothing and a mask. She described him as tall, with unusually prominent eyebrows. The figure looked at her and walked past. Dylan, confused and frightened, went back to her room and locked her door. She would not fully understand what had happened until hours later. Around noon the next day, a friend came to the house after a roommate called saying something felt wrong. He went upstairs and found the first victim. Police were called at 11:58 a.m. What investigators found inside that house was described in newly released police documents as among the most disturbing crime scenes officers had ever encountered. Walls soaked in blood. Victims so severely injured they could barely be identified on sight. The quiet college town of Moscow, Idaho would never be the same. 4 weeks after the murders, investigators had no named suspect. The community was terrified. Students left campus. Parents pulled their children home. The entire nation was watching. But investigators were quietly building a case, piece by piece. The first major break came from surveillance cameras in the area. Multiple cameras had captured a white Hyundai Elantra near the King Road house in the early hours of November 13th. Investigators traced the vehicle. It was registered to Bryan Christopher Kohberger, a 28-year-old PhD student at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington, just 8 miles from Moscow. Then came the cell phone data. Records showed Kohberger's phone had been in the vicinity of the King Road house at least 12 times before the night of the murders, almost always late at night or in the early hours of the morning. He had been watching, scouting, preparing. After November 13th, his phone never appeared near Moscow again. Not once. But the most damning piece of evidence had been left behind at the crime scene itself. A tan leather knife sheath, the kind used to carry a fixed-blade hunting knife, was found near one of the victims. On that sheath was a single piece of biological material. Investigators extracted DNA. When that DNA was run against national databases, it produced a familial match to a relative of Bryan Kohberger. Police moved to confirm it. They retrieved trash from outside the Kohberger family home in Pennsylvania, where Bryan had gone for the winter holidays. They pulled a DNA sample from the garbage. It matched the sheath exactly. They had their man. On the morning of December 30th, 2022, 6 weeks after the murders, investigators moved in. They had been surveilling Kohberger in Pennsylvania. In the days leading up to his arrest, officers noticed something telling. Even in public, even at the pharmacy, Kohberger consistently wore gloves. He was already thinking about evidence. On the morning of his arrest, he was seen outside sorting through garbage, wearing gloves, shortly before police approached. He was taken into custody without resistance and transported to the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks for questioning. When investigators introduced themselves, Kohberger reportedly told one detective that he looked familiar. He asked about his parents and his dog. For a while, he made small talk. He discussed his PhD program, his role as a teaching assistant, his interest in criminal justice. But the moment investigators mentioned Moscow, Idaho, Kohberger shut down completely. "I don't want to talk anymore," he said. And he asked for a lawyer. In the weeks and months that followed, a portrait of Bryan Kohberger began to emerge, and it was deeply unsettling. Classmates and colleagues at Washington State University described him as intelligent but controlling. Selfish. He was known to follow female co-workers to their cars. He once blocked a woman from leaving a classroom. He was frequently late to classes taught by women, but rarely late for male instructors. He was studying criminal decision-making, the psychology of why people commit crimes. And according to one fellow PhD student, after the Moscow murders became national news, Kohberger casually remarked that the killer, himself, must have been pretty good. When asked whether the murderer would ever be caught, he said, "Maybe it was a one-and-done type of thing." Released police documents also noted that a classmate had observed what appeared to be fresh scratch marks on Kohberger's face and wounds on his knuckles in October and November of 2022, on 2 separate occasions. When asked what happened, Kohberger said he had been in a car accident. For nearly 3 years, the case worked its way through the legal system. The trial was moved from Moscow to Boise due to the immense local publicity. It was scheduled to begin in August 2025. Then, 2 weeks before jury selection was set to start, Bryan Kohberger accepted a plea deal. On July 2, 2025, he stood in a Boise courtroom and pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. In exchange, prosecutors took the death penalty off the table. He also gave up the right to any future appeals. 3 weeks later, on July 23, 2025, he was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus 10 additional years for burglary. He will die in prison. At the sentencing, surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen spoke publicly for the first time, the woman who had seen him in that hallway and walked away alive. Victims' families addressed Kohberger directly from the stand, tears streaming as they described the lives he had ended and the pain that would never leave them. The judge acknowledged something that sat heavy in the courtroom. The motive, he said, may never be fully known. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. They were 20 and 21 years old. They had whole lives waiting for them, careers, families, futures that were taken in the dark hours of a November morning by someone who had been watching them, planning, and then walked away like nothing happened. Bryan Kohberger is behind bars for the rest of his life. But the question that haunts everyone who followed this case, why these 4, why that house, why that night, remains without a clean answer. Sometimes, that is the most terrifying truth of all. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe. Every case in the vault deserves to be told. Every name deserves to be remembered. We'll see you in the next vault.